Hello 3B, how are you doing? I finally have things organized for our painting lesson, painting in the style of Oliver Jeffers. Now you might remember when I read this book to you, Lost and Found, about the boy finding a lost penguin and becoming friends with him. And I mentioned when we were looking at this book that this is my favorite page. I just love this illustration with the whale swimming and the boat on the surface of the water. Now, I decided that this would be the inspiration for today's painting lesson, but I took a few artistic liberties, which means I took some of my own style and some of the techniques I like, and I've changed it just a little bit so that it's in his style, or it's inspired by Oliver Jeffers and his painting style, but it's unique enough that it's a little bit of its own twist. So the painting that I did today is just of the whales, no boat on top, and I used a fancy trick to make this interesting texture. I felt like that was kind of a watery, sort of bubbly texture that suited this kind of painting really well. So if you want to take a close-up look again, I copied the whales almost exactly from the picture. I left out the boat. I felt like that was a little bit complicated, and then I added those kind of bubbly textures on the surface of the paint. And I'd like to show you how to do it. Now before we begin, we need some materials. So if you do not have watercolor paints at home, this will be a little bit tricky. If you have any paint, you can try the techniques with it and see how it turns out, and you can let me know in the comments on the classroom site whether or not it was a success. However, you will need some basic things. So the first thing you'll need is some paper. I have this booklet of paper, and it is watercolor paper. It's just a little pad. I think it cost me a few dollars on Amazon. And watercolor paper is that textured paper. We've used it in class before. It's very heavy, it's very thick, almost like cereal box, that kind of thickness. And it's got a really nice bumpiness, and that helps absorb the water that's in watercolors, paints. They're not thick like acrylics, they're very wet, and sometimes they can tear or soak through thinner papers. Now if this is all you have is thinner paper, then try it and just don't add as much water. Or, since I said this is sort of the texture of a cereal box, if you want to try this on something like cereal or spaghetti box and just open it up and then paint on the blank side, give it a shot. I think that might work out really well, and then you can also let me know how that goes. But you do need some paper. You will need some paint brushes of some kind. You can try using Q-tips, things that you use to clean out your ears or to clean injuries. They won't work as well, but if you don't have a paintbrush at home, then you can give that a try. I have a larger size paintbrush, and I use that to do the wet on wet technique for the water, and you will remember wet on wet from class because we've done that before. And then I used a slightly smaller paintbrush that has a flat tip. And these are paintbrushes. You can get similar sort of sizes and shapes at Dollarama. These ones I again also bought on Amazon. I do like to do painting as a hobby, so I have a few materials at home. But you don't need to have anything fancy. So this is not necessary, fancy brushes for this project. And then the most important thing is you need paint. So my children have a paint set, and it did come from Amazon as well one Christmas, and it's Melissa and Doug brand. And I quite like it, and so the paints just look like this. So it has a few more color choices than the ones that we have at school that only have 8. And then I have my own watercolor set, and it's the Winsor & Newton brand, and it has all of these colors as well. And what I like about it is it has this palette that's included right up here. You can buy watercolor palettes at the dollar store, but you can order them online. But again, like I said, if you only have other kind of paints, try this out with a different type of paint, like washable Crayola paints may work. Let me know. But now, let's begin with the first step. And the first step is doing wet on wet painting to do the ocean, which is the background of our work. Okay, so the first thing that I need to do is grab a pencil, and I'm going to just very lightly draw in the shapes of my whales. So right at this part, I'm going to have the biggest whale of all. And it's kind of, the body's sort of the shape of a teardrop. Doesn't have to be perfect, with that beautiful long tail. You see how there's a little bit of a bump on the tail. And then one flipper and another flipper. And yeah, just do your best. Doesn't have to be exactly perfect or exactly like what a whale might look like. We're just learning. I'm gonna do this whale over here, and they're all swimming together in a pod. So they're all kind of going in the same direction. And one over here. This one's maybe way down low in the water. Much farther down than this one that's closer to the surface probably. And we'll do one more whale right here. All right, so we've got 4 whales. Now I said we're going to use the wet on wet technique. So the next thing that I'm going to do is fill up a cup with some water, and I'm going to take my biggest brush, make it quite wet. Oh, let me stop myself before I do that. I want to take some tape and tape down. I'll just do the corners. My paper is very heavy, so it doesn't tend to curl up very much. But you want to do something to secure your paper so that when it gets wet and begins to curl up, it doesn't make it impossible to paint, and it doesn't make the paint run everywhere. So let's line that up a little bit. And now I've got my wet brush, and I'm just going to rub water all over my dry paper and make my paper wet. And like I've said, you've done this before with me in art class, so this part should be familiar. I don't want it to be just absolutely saturated, but I do want each part of the paper to be wet. Now, once I have done that, I take my paint palette, and I'm going to get this one here that I worked on for my first example, and I'll show you what I do with the colors. So I wanted to make a bluey green like the ocean. So I grabbed some of this forest green color, made my brush wet, just slather it in. I added some of a bright blue, and then a little tiny bit of a purpley blue. And it gets such a nice color. Oh, isn't this gorgeous? Take a look at that color. So I'm happy with that shade. I dip my brush in the water again. I take a little bit of that paint, and I start painting my wet paper. And I like to go in a lot of different directions when I do this, because I don't want it to look like there's lines. I want it to look like the ocean. And I love the way that watercolors have dark spots and paler spots when you paint. That inkiness that bleeds all over the page. So I don't want to stop that from happening. Sometimes I even like to do a little bit of it extra, especially in this ocean picture. So there, I'm really happy with how that looks. And yeah, sure enough, my paper is starting to curl. So thank goodness I had that tape on the corners. Now this is the part that is totally different from Oliver Jeffers. I'm taking some coarse salt that I have in the house. See, it's the kind that you might use for making pickles. You could use regular salt, but the bigger the pieces, the better for this effect. So I sprinkle out a bit of this coarse pickling salt. And I'm just going to sprinkle it on my painting. Now what happens is that paint starts to pool around those pieces of salt, and it creates that really beautiful effect. Take a look at that. Isn't it gorgeous? Okay, I put that out in the sun to dry, so it didn't take me very long. You can try the same. Make sure it's not too windy out, or you might have things blow away. Now I need to do the paint mixing for the whales. So here's my palette again. And I'm going to use my smaller brush that I showed you with that flat tip. I make it wet, and this time I'm going to mix a little bit of that forest green, but not as much. I'm going to focus instead on using the bright blue, and I have this dark purpley kind of midnight blue. I'm gonna mix some of that together, and I'm gonna get a little bit of black. I really want these to be sort of shadowy looking. Okay, I'm gonna add just a bit more green. Sure, a little more blue. All right, I'm really happy with this color. Don't know how well you can see it. I'm gonna move now the palette out of the way. And what I'm gonna do is I want these still to be pretty watery. I want them to have that kind of pooling and bleeding look that the water had. So I'm dipping my brush in water. I'm dipping it in the paint. And this first whale, I'm going to do it fairly dark. This whale is the one that's the closest to the surface. Now I'm just gonna take my time. I really wanna stay in my lines. I don't wanna have done all of this and then have the misfortune of messing it up by rushing when I was doing the painting of the whale. That would be such a disappointment. Get some more paint. And I'm just going to keep on filling in those pencil lines I made at the beginning. Now I said to you I really like when there's those sort of darker and lighter bits, so I'm just going to do a bit of that. Maybe I want this part down here to be a bit darker. Move to the tail now. And then the fins. Okay, one last fin to go. Oh, I'm so happy with how that turned out. Maybe just darken that little bit up there a bit. Now all of the other whales, I want them to be a fair bit more pale. So now for the others, I'm going to put some paint on my brush and then dip my brush just very quickly in the water to dilute the paint a bit. Now these ones will still be that color, but it'll be waterier and a bit paler. And in fact, this is a lot of water on this one here. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to keep dipping my brush into this little sort of puddle on this whale to paint the other whales. I won't even need to go into my paint again because this whale is really wet, which is fine. Okay, so then instead of having to get more paint, I just keep on dipping into that second whale, which is good because this whale here looks like it's probably really deep compared to the first one, the big guy or girl. And so I want this one to be quite a bit more sort of pale. Okay, and then we've got this last one up in the corner. Now this one I will have to dip in my brush again to my paint, make it a little bit wet. Now what happens if you have just way too much water on your paper? Just use a piece of paper towel or a cloth that you don't mind getting a bit painty to collect some of that extra liquid. Absorb it. Don't rub though, because if you rub you can damage your paper and you'll damage your painting for sure. So there we have it. Now you'll notice in some spots things aren't exactly perfect. I made a little bit of a mistake with this here tail. But you know what, all in all, I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'm going to let it dry and then I'm going to trim off that little bit at the bottom with the holes. Well, I hope that you liked the art lesson today and I hope that you were able to try it yourself and had good effects. I'd love to see some of the finished products that you did at home. So please feel free to take a snapshot and to add it to our Google Classroom or to email it to me and I can post them for you. I would love to see your beautiful artwork that you're doing at home. Even if it isn't the Oliver Jeffers style, but you've been doing something really cool, please share it with us. Mrs. Schneider and I would love to see. All right, we'll talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.